G'day everyone, Artist Wayne here and welcome back to episode 4 of my Fury 3D tank build. And I've got to say I am having an absolute blast with this project. The tank is really starting to take shape, the details are stacking up, and every time I look at it, it's getting closer and closer to the Fury we all know from the film. And in this episode, things take a bit of a turn, because I'm diving back into 3D Studio Max. It's been a long time since I've done any serious 3D modelling, but there are some parts on this tank that just don't exist. So that means it's time to make them myself. The plan is to relearn the tools, build some custom details from scratch, and start creating pieces that will really bring this tank to life. So grab a coffee, strap in, and let's push forward, because Fury is really starting to take shape now. And this is where things really start getting interesting, because at this point the tank itself is coming together nicely. But now comes the hard part, making it look exactly like the one from the movie. Today, it's all about painting and adding more juicy details to the tank as I continue printing all the tools and stuff. Plus, the grill is not correct on the tank, so I'm going to have to build my own. So let me tell you, this is where the challenges really begin. My first big hurdle, the rear of the tank. The exhaust grill on this model isn't quite right compared to the movie version, so that meant I had to stop, study the reference photos, rewatch scenes from the film, and work out how I was going to modify it to match Fury properly. Then there's the gear, and oh boy, there's a lot of it. The movie tank is absolutely loaded with gear. Bags, crates, bedrolls, spare parts, jerry cans, you name it. And of course, the jerry cans that came with this model aren't the ones from the film. So that meant more research, more modelling, and more problem solving to get everything looking right. This is the stage where you stop following instructions, well, not that I was, and start making creative decisions. And that's really what this episode is all about. Figuring things out, making changes, modifying parts, searching for parts, and slowly turning a good 3D model into Fury. So in this episode, I'm tackling the rear deck, the exhaust area, the gear, the stowage, and of course, there's the logs. Those big timber logs strapped to the sides of Fury are one of its most iconic features. And they're not just there for looks either. They were used as extra armour and for recovery in the field. So now I've got a big decision to make. Do I find real timber, cut it down to scale and weather it naturally? Or do I 3D print them and try to recreate the texture and damage by hand? Either way, this is one of those big decisions that can make or break the final look of the model. And all the little details that give this tank its personality. Because once all that starts going on, this build really begins to come alive. Now, one thing that was really important to me with this build was getting the small details right, especially the gear that gives Fury its character. And that meant finding the correct US Army World War II jerry cans. You see, the US Army had adopted the German-designed jerry can during World War II. They recognised its superior design for fuel and water transport, copying and modifying it with simpler construction, like rolled seams instead of recessed welds and an X indentation for strength, becoming a vital logistical tool for fueling armies across continents, with the US version typically in olive drab and used for both fuel and vital water supplies. I spent a fair bit of time searching through different 3D model sites, trying to find something that actually matched what's seen in the movie, and eventually I struck gold on CG Trader. They had exactly what I was looking for, proper World War II style jerry cans with the correct shape, proportions and details. I ended up grabbing two versions, one with the cap on and one without, because if you look closely at the Fury tank, it actually carries both. And the best part, they were on sale, $2.50 each. Honestly, it felt like they were made specifically for this build. Once I test fitted them, I knew they were staying. They just worked. Scale, detail, everything. Fury carries 4 empty jerry cans across the rear shelf, 2 full cans strapped on top of the engine deck, and another mounted on the left rear fender. And I wanted to make sure every single one was in the right place. It's the little details like this that really sell the illusion and start turning a model into something that feels alive. And of course, while all this was going on, I was still attacking the build from every angle, printing parts, adding layers of mud with wood putty, painting grime and wear, constantly jumping between tasks as things dried or finished printing. This build really turned into organised chaos, but that's part of the fun. The more layers I added, the more Fury started to feel alive. At this point in the build, I knew it was time to step things up a notch and start creating parts myself, because as good as this Sherman model was, there was a problem starting to loom. While it shared a lot of DNA with the movie version of Fury, there was still plenty of details that just weren't there. So I dusted off an old skill I haven't used in years, 3D Studio Max. It's funny, you know, once you get back into it, it's a bit like riding a bike. Clunky at first, but it all starts coming back pretty quickly. And naturally, instead of easing myself in with something simple, I went straight for the hardest part, Fury's exhaust grille. This wasn't just a case of copying the kit part. The movie tank has a very specific look, and the grille is completely different to what this Sherman had. So I found myself poring over reference photos from the film, cross-checking them against World War II tank images, and then trying to translate all of that into something that would actually work at 1/10 scale. Getting the proportions right was the real challenge. Too thick and it looks toy-like, too thin and it won't print or survive handling. But slowly, piece by piece, it started coming together. And that's when I knew this build had officially entered the next level. Now we're getting into it. Because the grille is slightly different, no, everything must be correct. I've made the grille in 3D Studio Max. So, time will tell if this works or not. Alright, there's my tank grille hot off the press. Hey, have a go at that. I've got to clean it up a little bit, but I should be able to put that on whatever angle I want. After successfully pulling this job off, from that point on the floodgates opened. I started creating all the little details that make Fury what it is. A spool of wire, the barrel that sits on the back of the tank, ammo boxes, wooden crates, even the steel eyelets that sit on the end of the tow cable running from the front of the tank down the left-hand side. All of it had to be right. Some of these parts weren't just printed and then that was it. The barrel, for example, needed to be heat-shaped to get that proper dented look, like it had taken a few knocks in combat. It's those little imperfections that sell the illusion. That's what turns a model into Fury. And honestly, this was a big turning point for me, because now I knew, not just for this build, but for all future projects, if I needed a part, I could make it. No compromises, no close enough, just build it properly. At this point, my 1/10 scale Fury tank wasn't just being built anymore, it was being engineered.
hot off the press. Ammo box.
One really useful thing I learned during this episode was how much infill affects parts when you need to heat and shape them. When I realised I'd need to bend, dent or mould certain pieces, I started lowering the infill in Prusa Slicer, and it made a huge difference. With less infill, the parts soften more evenly when heated, which makes them far easier to manipulate without cracking or fighting back. This became especially important for things like bags and stowage. Real canvas bags aren't rigid. They have that bulky, uneven outline where the contents inside create lumps, sagging and odd shapes.
Just printed that last box out. Yes, it'll be all scuffed up and dirty. It's coming together now.
By printing with lower infill and carefully applying heat, I could push and shape the parts so they looked organic, like they were actually stuffed full of gear, not just printed solid plastic. It's one of those small techniques that makes a huge difference, and something I'll definitely be using on future builds. Sometimes the trick isn't in the paint, it's in how you print the part in the first place. Like Fury's squashed cardboard box, which I created using 3D Studio Max. Another handy technique I started using in this build was the skirt layer in Slicer. For things like bag straps and tie downs, I didn't need thick, solid parts. I needed something thin, flexible and easy to work with. By using the skirt and simply adjusting the layer height and width, I could create straps exactly as thick as I needed them. It gave me complete control, thin enough to look like canvas or webbing, but strong enough to glue and shape without falling apart. Little tricks like this make a huge difference, especially when you're building soft details like bags and stowage that need to look organic rather than rigid.
Alright, yesterday was all about adding the luggage and all the stuff that goes into making Fury. So, most of the boxes, well actually all of the boxes, I made in 3D Studio Max, including this one. This cardboard box will have rope over it, that's why it's squashed here. It'll all make sense when the ropes go on. The bags I made, I'm just printing out a bag as we speak. And all of this stuff will get a good coat of crappy black.
After using the skirt layer for straps, it got me thinking about another detail on the back of Fury, the folded flag. Instead of trying to model something complicated, I went with a much simpler approach.
Righty-ho, now there's a flag on the back of the tank. So I am going to print, this is actually a box, but I'm going to stop it once it's finished this layer, peel it off, heat it up, and make a flag that I can drape over all the boxes. That's if it works or not.
Well, it sure did, because that single layer gave me exactly what I needed, a thin, flexible sheet that I could use as the flag itself. Of course, it couldn't just sit there flat. The flag on Fury is folded and draped over the rear stowage, so it needed to look natural, like fabric, not plastic. That's where the heat gun came back into play. And just like the flag adding another layer of realism, I moved on to something else that would. The ropes. If you look closely at the movie tank, ropes are draped, tied and wrapped all over it. And they're not just decoration, they add weight, texture and that lived-in feel that makes the tank look like it's been in the field for months. So these couldn't just be any ropes, they needed the right thickness, the right twist and the right way of hanging, exactly like they do in the film. Getting them to sit naturally took a bit of trial and error and a lot of glue, but once they were in place they made a massive difference. It's amazing how something as simple as rope can instantly push a model from really good to convincingly real. Now, throughout this whole build, there was one detail constantly living rent-free in my head. The logs. I was forever looking at printable logs, or thinking about how I could model one properly in 3D Studio Max, or quietly wondering if I could just cut a few branches off one of Jackie's trees. I mean, would she even notice? So that's exactly what I did, because let's be honest, it's always better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And once I did, yeah, it was totally worth it. Model building is about realism and occasionally making questionable life choices. For legal reasons, this build involved found materials. With the logs finally shaped and looking the part, all that was left was to strap them to the sides of Fury and then hit them with a little black for good measure. That subtle darkening helps tie everything together, knocking back the fresh timber look and making them feel like they've been riding on the side of this tank for a long time. And with the logs sorted, there was just one last thing I needed to add to the hull. 2 bags, custom made in 3D Studio Max. These were designed specifically for this build, printed to scale and shape to sit naturally against the tank and the surrounding gear. Once they were in place, that was it. The hull was finally complete, and Fury was ready to move on to the turret. Alright everyone, that wraps up episode 4 of my 1/10th scale Fury 3D tank build. And this one's been all about the details, as I bring this tank closer and closer to the movie version. There's been a lot of problem solving, a lot of rethinking of parts, and figuring out how to recreate all those iconic features that make this tank so recognisable. At this point, the hull is coming along beautifully, the weathering is telling a story, and the tank looks like it rolled straight out of the film. All that's left now is the turret. I'm absolutely loving this build and bringing this tank to life, and I cannot wait to bring it across the line in the final episode. So if you're enjoying the journey, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you all in episode 5, because Fury is almost complete.